Every autumn, one of the most extraordinary journeys in the natural world begins. Across southern Canada and the eastern United States, millions of delicate orange and black butterflies quietly leave the places where they were born. Look, they gather above meadows, forests, wetlands and lakes before turning south, setting out on a journey that stretches for nearly 4,000 kilometers for an animal that weighs less than a gram. Glück. Such a migration seems almost impossible. They will cross vast lakes with nowhere to land. They will travel through endless grasslands, follow winding rivers, pass mountains, Glück, and move across 3 countries before reaching a destination hidden high in the forests of central Mexico. Yet the greatest mystery is not the distance. It is that no single monarch butterfly completes the entire cycle. Glück. The butterflies that begin the journey south in autumn are not the same ones that eventually return to Canada. Instead, the migration survives because each generation carries the journey a little farther, passing it on to the next in an unbroken chain that has continued for thousands of years. How can an insect with a brain no larger than a grain of rice find a mountain forest it has never seen before? Glück. Why do millions of butterflies gather in one small region after spreading across an entire continent? And how has this remarkable migration endured through changing seasons, shifting landscapes? Glück. And countless generations. To answer those questions, we must begin where every southbound migration begins, in the fading days of a Canadian summer when the flowers are still in bloom. Glück. The mornings grow a little cooler and the first quiet signs of autumn begin to appear. This is the story of one of the greatest migrations on Earth, the story of the monarch butterfly. Summer has not ended yet. Across southern Ontario, warm sunlight still washes over flowering meadows, maple forests, quiet wetlands, and the northern shoreline of Lake Erie. Goldenrod paints the fields in brilliant yellow. Glück. While purple asters spread across the grasslands, a gentle breeze ripples through the flowers, and from a distance the landscape seems peaceful, unchanged, almost timeless. But nature has already begun to change. Glück. The days are growing shorter, the nights are becoming cooler. High above the Great Lakes, shifting weather patterns signal that autumn is approaching. These changes are subtle. Glück. Almost impossible to notice from one day to the next, yet they are among the most reliable seasonal cues in the natural world. For the monarch butterfly, they mark the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Glück. Scattered across the meadows, bright orange wings move quietly from flower to flower. At first glance, these butterflies appear identical to those that filled the landscape earlier in the summer. Glück. In reality, this generation is profoundly different. Unlike the generations before them, these butterflies are not racing to reproduce. Their bodies have developed for another purpose entirely. Glück. They will live much longer than their parents and devote these final weeks of summer to building the energy reserves needed for one of the longest insect migrations on Earth. Every flower becomes important. Glück. Goldenrod, asters and countless other late-season wildflowers provide nectar rich in sugars that will be converted into the fuel required for thousands of kilometers of flight. Glück. Each visit lasts only a few moments but repeated hundreds of times every day. Those brief stops gradually prepare the butterflies for the challenge ahead. The meadows are shared with many other species. Glück. Native bees move from blossom to blossom collecting pollen. Smaller butterflies weave through the flowers. Countless insects feed side by side without conflict, taking advantage of the final abundance before autumn transforms the landscape. Glück. As afternoon winds begin to strengthen, the butterflies respond immediately. Rather than continuing to fly, many settle onto sturdy stems and leaves, gripping the vegetation until calmer conditions return. Glück. Conserving energy is as important as gathering it. Every unnecessary flight shortens the reserves they will soon depend upon. Toward evening, the rhythm of the landscape changes again. Glück. Monarch butterflies gradually leave the open fields and drift toward sheltered trees along the edges of the meadows. Hidden beneath branches protected from the wind, hundreds gather to spend the night. Glück. As temperatures fall, their wings remain tightly closed. Their flight muscles cannot function efficiently in the cold, so they wait in silence for the warmth of another morning. Glück. With sunrise, the forest slowly awakens. Thin mist rises above the grasslands as sunlight reaches the upper branches. One by one, the butterflies open their wings, absorbing heat until they are ready to fly once more. Glück. Their destination is Point Pelee, a narrow peninsula reaching into Lake Erie. Every autumn, this small strip of land becomes one of the most important gathering places along the eastern migration route. Glück. Here, monarch butterflies pause before attempting the crossing ahead. Beyond the shoreline lies only open water. No flowers, no shelter, no place to rest. They will not leave until the temperature is right and the wind offers its quiet support. Glück. Then, as the first butterflies lift from the trees and drift away from the Canadian shore, summer is left behind and one of nature's greatest migrations quietly begins. The first butterflies leave the shoreline quietly. There is no signal, no leader, and no fixed formation. Each monarch responds to the same environmental cues. The air has become warm enough for flight. Glück. The sunlight provides the energy their flight muscles need, and the wind has finally turned in their favor. Only then does the crossing begin. Behind them, Point Pelee slowly disappears. Glück. Ahead lies Lake Erie, one of the 5 Great Lakes of North America. From the air, its vast surface stretches towards the horizon until the boundary between water and sky almost disappears. Glück. For a butterfly weighing less than a gram, this is not simply another stage of the journey. It is one of its greatest tests. Once they leave the shore, there are no flowers to replenish their energy. Glück. There are no branches on which to rest and no safe places to wait if conditions suddenly change. Every kilometer above open water depends entirely on the nectar collected during the final weeks of summer in Glück. Although their wings beat continuously, monarch butterflies do not rely on strength alone. Their survival depends on efficiency. They alternate between active flight and short periods of gliding whenever the surrounding air allows it. Glück. Favorable winds reduce the energy required, while small adjustments in altitude help them avoid unstable air near the water's surface. Rather than fighting every gust, they constantly respond to the changing atmosphere around them. Glück. The weather over the lake is rarely constant. A passing bank of clouds can cool the air within minutes. A stronger wind may alter their course, forcing the butterflies to correct their direction while continuing south. Glück. Yet these changing conditions do not always become disasters. More often, survival depends on finding a stable window of weather long enough to complete the crossing, hour after hour. Glück. The butterflies continue across the immense expanse of water. Then, almost imperceptibly, the landscape begins to change. A faint dark line appears on the southern horizon as they fly closer. Glück. Forests, wetlands, and shoreline of the United States gradually come into view. After so long surrounded only by water and sky, solid ground finally returns beneath their wings. Glück. The first butterflies descend toward trees and flowering plants along the coast, pausing briefly to feed and recover. Their crossing of Lake Erie is complete, but their migration is far from over. Look ahead lies a continent of rivers, grasslands, forests and mountains stretching thousands of kilometers towards central Mexico. The challenge of open water has ended, but the greater journey across North America has only just begun. Beyond the Great Lakes, the migration enters a very different world. The journey is no longer defined by open water, but by a vast network of landscapes stretching across the heart of North America. Look, from Michigan and Wisconsin to Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and the great Mississippi River, monarch butterflies move through a continent connected by rivers, grasslands, wetlands. Look. Forests and flowering meadows. This is not a single flight path drawn across a map. It is a living highway. Again and again, the butterflies descend into fields filled with goldenrod, gluck, asters, and countless native wildflowers. These meadows are far more than beautiful landscapes. They are essential refueling stations where nectar is transformed into the energy needed for the next stage of the migration. Look. Without these flowering habitats, few butterflies could travel much farther. The journey continues along the great river systems of North America. The Mississippi River does more than carry water south. Look. Its floodplains, wetlands and riparian forests create long corridors where flowering plants thrive. These green ribbons guide not only monarch butterflies but also birds, insects, gluck, and countless other animals moving across the continent. From high above, another remarkable landscape unfolds. The tallgrass prairies stretch toward every horizon, forming one of the largest grassland ecosystems on Earth. Look. Seen from the sky, an individual butterfly almost disappears against the immense sea of grasses. Yet these prairies have supported monarch migrations for thousands of years, providing food, gluck, shelter and breeding habitat generation after generation. No living creature can remain in flight forever. As daylight fades, monarch butterflies settle into scattered trees standing between open fields. Gluck. They spend the night protected from cooling temperatures and rising winds, conserving energy before continuing north or south with the next morning's sunlight. Even the longest migration is built from countless short flights separated by moments of rest. Along the way, the butterflies share these landscapes with many other species. Native bees gather pollen from the same flowers. Dragonflies patrol the wetlands, meadowbirds search for seeds and insects among the grasses. White-tailed deer cross the prairies while rabbits disappear into the vegetation. Gluck. Each species follows its own rhythm, yet all depend on the same interconnected habitats. The monarch butterfly is only one traveler among many. Its migration is possible not because of extraordinary strength, gluck, but because an entire continent still provides the habitats needed at exactly the right places and the right times. Every meadow, every river corridor, every wetland, gluck. And every stretch of native prairie becomes another link in a chain that reaches from Canada to Mexico. The butterflies continue south, carried not by a single road, but by an entire living landscape. The forests of the north are now far behind. Ahead, the landscape opens into the immense Great Plains, where the horizon stretches almost without end, across Kansas, Oklahoma, and the northern edge of Texas. Grasslands roll beneath enormous skies, crossed only by distant roads and scattered patches of native vegetation. Here, the scale of the land begins to reshape the migration itself. Distances grow longer. Resting places become farther apart. The butterflies continue south, but the landscape no longer offers the same abundance found in the northern meadows. Glück. Late-season flowers become less common. Some grasslands still bloom with pockets of nectar-rich plants, while others have already faded into dry grasses beneath the autumn sun. Glück. Between one flowering meadow and the next, the distance continues to increase. Every productive stop becomes more valuable than the last. The monarchs respond not with speed, but with efficiency. Look, whenever flowers appear, they feed. When resources become scarce, they continue onward, carrying only the energy already stored within their bodies. Their migration is shaped not only by instinct, Glück, but by the changing availability of food across the continent. Another challenge is impossible to ignore. The wind. Across the Great Plains, air is almost always in motion. Sometimes it offers gentle assistance, Glück, allowing butterflies to travel with less effort. At other times, strong crosswinds force them lower over the landscape or into the shelter of shrubs and trees, rather than resisting every gust. Glück. They constantly adjust their height, direction and timing, reducing unnecessary energy loss whenever conditions become difficult. As the journey continues, another pattern emerges. Glück. Autumn does not arrive everywhere at once, while northern Ontario has already begun to glow with yellow and orange leaves. Forests farther south still remain mostly green across Illinois, Glück. Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma and Texas, each region experiences the changing season at its own pace. The monarch butterfly is not traveling through a single autumn, but through many autumns unfolding simultaneously across one vast continent. Glück. By late afternoon, long shadows once again stretch across the grasslands. Far to the south, the first distant hills begin to appear beyond the plains. They are still small against the horizon, Glück. But they mark another turning point in the migration. Beyond them lie Texas, the borderlands, and eventually the mountains of Mexico. The journey grows longer with every passing day, Glück. Yet the butterflies continue, following a landscape that changes almost as constantly as the seasons themselves. After weeks of crossing forests, rivers, wetlands, and endless grasslands, the migration reaches one of its most important stages. Texas, from above, the landscape seems to gather travelers from every direction. Glück. Butterflies that began their journey hundreds of kilometers apart gradually enter the same broad corridor, not because they follow one another, but because geography, climate, Glück, and the distribution of suitable habitats naturally guide them toward the same route. For countless monarchs, Texas becomes a giant funnel across the rolling hills and open prairies of the hill country. Late-season wildflowers still bloom beneath the warm southern sun. These flowering meadows are among the final opportunities for many butterflies to replenish their energy before continuing toward the mountains of Mexico. Glück. Every patch of nectar-rich flowers becomes another essential stop in a journey that has already lasted for weeks. The migration has also left its mark. Many butterflies no longer carry the flawless wings they had when leaving Canada. Glück. The edges have become worn. Tiny tears appear along the margins. Their brilliant orange has faded slightly after thousands of kilometers beneath changing skies. Yet despite these signs of age, Glück, they continue flying with remarkable determination. The journey is not measured by perfect wings. It is measured by endurance. Farther south, another great landscape begins to shape the migration. Glück. The Rio Grande winds across the border between the United States and Mexico, creating a broad ribbon of water, forests, wetlands, and flowering vegetation, rather than acting as a barrier. Glück. The river forms another ecological corridor connecting habitats across two nations. Along its banks, monarch butterflies continue to feed, rest, and gradually move toward higher ground. Glück. Beyond the river, the horizon begins to change once again. The vast plains that have dominated so much of the migrations slowly give way to distant mountain ranges, rising faintly against the southern sky. Glück. The first ridges of the Sierra Madre announce the next stage of the journey. The butterflies do not stop here. Their destination lies farther ahead, hidden among forests that cannot yet be seen from the plains below. Glück. By now, they have crossed nearly 4,000 kilometers of remarkably diverse landscapes. Yet the final destination is not found in the warm lowlands of Texas or along the border itself. Glück. It waits high above them. Somewhere within the mountains of central Mexico, a forest with the right temperature, humidity and shelter is preparing to receive millions of travelers. Glück. The longest part of the journey is nearly complete. The search for the perfect winter refuge is about to begin. The landscape changes once again. Behind the monarchs, the broad plains of Texas gradually fade into the distance. Ahead, the first mountain ranges of northeastern and central Mexico begin to rise. Glück. Valleys deepen, ridges become more frequent, and the air grows noticeably cooler with every kilometer. The migration is entering its final stage at first glance. Glück. It might seem strange that butterflies flying south toward a warmer climate would now begin climbing into higher elevations. But their destination has never been simply the southernmost point of the continent. Glück. It is a very specific environment. As the mountains rise, the butterflies naturally follow broad valleys that cut through the rugged terrain. These valleys provide more stable air currents. Glück. Sheltered routes between ridges and scattered patches of flowering plants where nectar can still be found. Rivers winding through the valleys also support forests and meadows that offer brief opportunities to rest before the final descent. Glück. With increasing elevation, the vegetation begins to change. Oak forests gradually give way to taller conifers. Morning mist lingers longer beneath the trees, while clouds drift slowly across the mountain slopes. Glück. The intense heat of the lowlands is replaced by cooler, more stable conditions. This is exactly what the butterflies have been seeking, contrary to what many people assume. Glück. Monarch butterflies do not survive the winter by finding the warmest place available. If temperatures remain too high, they continue using energy reserves too quickly and may exhaust the fat they accumulated during migration before spring arrives. Glück. At the same time, temperatures cannot become too cold. Freezing conditions would damage their bodies and greatly reduce their chances of survival. Glück. The butterflies require a remarkably narrow range of environmental conditions, cool enough to slow their metabolism, yet warm enough to avoid prolonged freezing. Humidity is equally important. Glück. Dry air causes water loss, while strong winds increase both dehydration and energy expenditure. The surrounding forest plays a vital role by reducing temperature fluctuations. Glück. Retaining moisture and shielding the butterflies from the harshest weather. Not every mountain forest can provide these conditions. Some are too warm, others are too dry. Many stand at the wrong elevation or receive too much direct sunlight. Glück. Only a handful of forests within the mountains of central Mexico create the unique combination of altitude, temperature, humidity, and protection that monarch butterflies require to survive the winter. Glück. As the afternoon light softens, the butterflies continue climbing through the mountain valleys. Above them, clouds drift across the highest ridges, hiding forests that remain invisible from below. Glück. After nearly 4,000 kilometers of flight, the destination is finally close. It is not a single tree, not a single mountain, but a small cluster of high-elevation forests suspended among the clouds. Glück, where millions of butterflies from across an entire continent will soon gather. The journey through North America is almost complete. Only the forest of millions remains ahead. After nearly 4,000 kilometers of flight, the journey finally reaches its destination. Not a tropical rainforest, not a warm valley, but a cool mountain forest hidden high in the mountains of central Mexico. Glück. At first, nothing seems unusual. Endless ridges are covered with oyamel fir trees. While morning mist drifts silently through the valleys, the forest is calm, the air is cold and damp. Glück. Even the birds seem quieter here. It is difficult to imagine that this peaceful landscape is about to reveal one of the greatest wildlife spectacles on Earth. As the camera moves deeper beneath the canopy, Glück, the mystery slowly unfolds. The trunks appear darker than expected. Thick branches seem unusually heavy. From a distance, they look as though they have been covered by patches of brown leaves that never fell during winter. Glück, but they are not leaves. Every dark surface is covered with monarch butterflies. Thousands cling to a single branch. Tens of thousands cover an entire tree across the surrounding forest. Glück. Millions of butterflies hang motionless together, forming living blankets that hide the bark beneath their wings. What first appeared to be an ordinary forest is, in fact, one of the largest gatherings of insects anywhere on Earth. Glück. This extraordinary concentration is no accident. Each autumn, monarch butterflies from across eastern North America converge on only a handful of mountain forests within the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. Glück. Although they spent the previous months scattered across millions of square kilometers from southern Canada to the United States, they ultimately gather within a surprisingly small region of central Mexico. Glück. The question is not simply how they arrive here, it is why they stop here. The answer lies in the forest itself. Oyamel fir forests create an exceptionally stable microclimate. Glück. Their dense canopy reduces the force of the wind. The high elevation keeps temperatures cool enough to slow the butterflies' metabolism, allowing them to conserve the fat reserves stored during migration. Glück. At the same time, the surrounding clouds and humid mountain air reduce water loss, helping prevent dehydration during the long winter months. If the forest becomes too warm, the butterflies consume energy too quickly. Glück. If it becomes too cold, freezing temperatures can become deadly. If the air becomes too dry, they lose precious moisture. Survival depends on a remarkably delicate balance, and only a few mountain forests provide exactly the conditions they need. During the cold hours before sunrise, the colonies remain almost completely still. Their flight muscles cannot generate enough power until their bodies absorb sufficient warmth from the morning sun. Glück. For hours, the forest appears frozen in time. Then the light begins to change. Thin rays of sunlight filter through the mist. Temperatures rise by only a few degrees, yet that small difference transforms the entire mountain. Glück. A few butterflies slowly open their wings, then a few more. Within minutes, scattered movements spread from branch to branch until countless orange wings begin to shimmer beneath the trees. Butterflies lift gently into the air, circling through shafts of sunlight before settling again nearby. The forest itself seems to awaken. It is not an explosion of movement. It is a quiet awakening. Glück repeated. Day after day, throughout the winter, whenever conditions are favorable. Seen from above, the scale becomes almost impossible to comprehend. Glück. An entire continent has guided millions of butterflies toward a destination that occupies only a tiny fraction of its total area, after crossing rivers, lakes, grasslands, cities. Farms and mountains, they have all arrived at these cool forests hidden among the clouds. Here, the migration pauses, not because the story is over, but because another chapter is waiting. When spring returns, these same butterflies will leave the forest once more, yet none of them will ever complete the entire journey back to Canada. The migration will continue. Glück. But it will do so through a new generation, carrying forward one of nature's most remarkable cycles of life. Winter does not last forever. As the first warmth of spring reaches the mountains of central Mexico, the Oyamel forest begins to change once again. Morning mist slowly lifts from the valleys. Glück. Sunlight filters through the evergreen canopy, and the silent clusters of monarch butterflies gradually awaken. One by one, they leave the trees that protected them throughout the winter and begin flying north. Glück. Their migration has resumed, but this time the destination is not the forest they left behind. It is the vast continent waiting beyond the mountains. Soon, the butterflies reach the flowering landscapes of northern Mexico. Glück. Where the first stage of a new cycle begins. They feed, mate, and search for milkweed, the only plant on which monarch butterflies lay their eggs. A single egg carefully placed beneath a fresh leaf. Glück represents far more than the beginning of another life. It is the continuation of a migration that no individual butterfly can complete alone. The adults that survived the winter will never return to Canada. Glück. Their role is different. They pass the journey forward. Within weeks, a new generation emerges and continues north across Texas, the Great Plains, the Mississippi River, and the fertile landscapes of the American Midwest. Glück. Later generations move even farther, eventually reaching the flowering meadows, wetlands, and forests of southern Ontario, where the story quietly returns to the place where it began. Glück. No butterfly has seen the entire route. No butterfly remembers every mountain, every river, or every meadow between Mexico and Canada. Each generation inherits only one part of the journey. Glück. Yet together, generation after generation, they complete a migration that has continued for thousands of years. Seen from above, the migration is no longer the movement of individual butterflies. Glück. It becomes the movement of an entire continent. Native grasslands provide nectar and shelter. Rivers create green corridors across the landscape. Wetlands support flowering plants and countless other species. Glück. Milkweed appears in scattered fields and roadside meadows. Mountain forests preserve the delicate winter climate that allows millions of butterflies to survive until spring. Every habitat plays its part. Glück. Remove enough of those connections and the migration begins to weaken. Protect them and the journey continues. As another summer passes across southern Ontario, the landscape changes once more. Glück. Goldenrod blooms across the fields. Purple asters brighten the meadows. Days slowly become shorter. Mornings cooler, and the first signs of autumn quietly return among the flowers. Glück. A new generation of monarch butterflies gathers nectar beneath the late summer sun. They are not the butterflies that left Mexico in spring. They are not the butterflies that crossed Lake Erie the previous autumn. Glück. They are the descendants of those travelers, born to continue a journey that has been shared across generations. Soon they will rise into the sky and turn south once again. This cycle begins where it always has, with changing seasons. Glück. Living landscapes and countless small decisions guided by sunlight, temperature, and instinct. No single monarch butterfly completes the entire journey. Yet together, each generation carries the migration forward. Glück. Across rivers and grasslands, across mountains and forests, across 3 nations year after year, season after season, the journey belongs to no single butterfly. It belongs to life itself. Glück. And as long as the landscapes that connect a continent continue to endure, the monarch migration will remain one of Earth's greatest natural wonders. The journey continues.